I mean, exactly what you said. There is what? Rarely a story or rarely a family that doesn't have a story. What did you say?
I said that there's rarely a person that you'll cross paths with that doesn't either have their own story of a holy bleep. If this happened, I could have very easily drowned, or somebody that they know, a brother, a sister, an aunt, an uncle, friend.
Yeah.
And that is something that I've come across over and over and over again. Even speaking with Christina from the Rose Bowl Aquatic Center, she talked about her story of nearly drowning, not near drowning, but nearly drowning way back when. And aquatics professionals, Chris Thurber,
Yeah.
Dr. Chris Thurber, who's an aquatics expert, a 30, 40-year lifeguard, professional aquatic waterman, nearly could have drowned if he didn't have a buddy nearby. And this is a guy that, is steeped in not only knowledge, but also skill. It's common. It's common. And what happens a lot of times is that we bury those memories underneath all the good memories of water. Oh my gosh, remember that time we had at the beach? Oh my gosh, remember that time we had, on that vacation at the bay? And we just bury those things, and we bury the bad and we remember the good.
Yeah. And that's exactly what, we were kind of just talking about. I didn't even remember that I had nearly drowned when I was like 11 years old. It wasn't until after Yori, drowned that then I don't even remember what got the memory up. I don't remember if it was my mom saying something, but at some point I was like, oh my gosh, like I remember that. I remember jumping off the diving board and getting too much water in. And so yeah, I almost wonder too, it's this weird thing of, not that it happens to everyone, but some people that do have those experiences, it changes and shapes. I consider what we're doing now, and that we wouldn't be doing what we were doing if we hadn't had this experience, at all.
I don't know if it changes people. I'm not necessarily pushing back at you, but I had that experience when I was 25. I had an experience when I was very young where another child pulled me down on the edge of a pool deck and knocked me so hard that I had to have stitches underneath my chin. And again, you take a lifeguard out of that situation, and I could have been knocked out, slid down in the pool, nobody sees you, et cetera, et cetera. It didn't prevent me from going back into a pool, going into the ocean, doing crazy stuff, as a kid, as even a young adult. And I don't mean super crazy. I'm not jumping off bridges or anything like that. But I, what happens is, again, I think we eclipse the danger piece, or perhaps the negative or less than favorable memories. We replace them with all the good ones, and that's okay, because you don't want to dwell on the fear or the pain. But I do think that's really important, to every time we approach a body of water, that we approach it with the respect and the gratitude that we have for that body of water, whether it's pool or lake, river, ocean, whatever. And we just don't do that. That's just it's not in our arsenal of emotions, where we're just kind of thinking, oh my God, I can't wait to get into the pool. It's going to feel so damn good. It's just human nature to kind of go down that road and say, well, this is such a good thing, instead of, well, this is a good thing, but it's also a thing that I need to respect.
Yeah. This is going to be a little bit backwards because I'm going to go ahead and do an introduction. As you can see, Doug and I are very familiar with each other. We both have organizations dedicated to, well, I'm going to ask you, what would you say that your organization is dedicated to?
Well, first of all, Shazik's my sister from another mother. I'm just going to get that out there.
Good job.
Thank goodness I have you in my life. I'm sad and extraordinarily thankful and grateful that I do have you in my life, and will always feel that way until the day I die. And I'm only sad because what brought me here was the drowning of I should say, the preventable death of my 6-year-old daughter, Roxy, in 2019, June 28th, 2019. She was at a camp pool, a very small camp pool, and she was under the supervision of fraudulently certified lifeguards, counselors certified fraudulently as lifeguards. And she drowned because they neglected her to death. And what do you do in that moment of life where you can live or die?
Mhm.
You can either find purpose through the pain, or you can just live in the pain. So my wife, Elena, and I said, let's do the purpose piece. And we started Meow Foundation, which is named in honor of our daughter, Roxy. She used to have a little comfort doll. There was this little feline comfort doll that she called, it was originally called Scrappy Cat, but she called it Meow Meow. So what we felt we had to do was comfort other children and other families. And we felt like this comfort doll represented that in such an iconic way. Named our foundation Meow Foundation. And what we do are two things. We do camp safety and we do aquatic safety.
There you go. Yeah. And so it's really interesting you talk about families because that's what this Learn More series is about. This month is talking about family stories. And, we really use this as a resource. So this will live on YouTube. Hi, all you YouTubers out there. Really to act as a resource. And I'm kind of considering this as a resource, this talk between us about, I think, a couple of things. One, I kind of want to talk about, as much as I hate to talk about it, post what is comforting, to families like us, what does, and it's hard sometimes to say what feels better because often nothing does, but I think it's a resource to people who are supporting people who have lost children. And it's also a resource for those that have lost children and things that, have or were helpful to us. Granted, we are very similar. I will say that. And that's why I'm your sister from another mister. Because we have chosen this route to find purpose through the pain, like something to keep us going. But I guess my first kind of thought or question is like, was obviously it's hard to say what was helpful because I understand nothing is quite helpful, but was there anything that you remember, anything, after the tragedy of losing Roxy, that what was helpful, what helped you?
Hmm.
I mean, we're still thinking about it, aren't we?
Yeah, you never stop thinking about it. And it's just the word helpful that is an interesting word. You know, I I think and here's what I do now instead of what I used to do. What I do now is I sit here and I think.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have these immediate reactions of what's going to help me, it's going to be this or it's going to be that. And now I'm a little bit more pensive. I'm a little bit more thoughtful about those questions because I, first of all, want to say that what works for me isn't necessarily a universal salve for somebody else. Um, for me, I think it's love. And what I mean by that is you, there's, for me, there's one reason why we're here, and that's to share love as much as we can. And if that sounds trivial or trite, I don't give a damn. Because the love that I had and still have for my child and my wife, um, it's never ending. And I think if we compartmentalize ourselves into kind of what we have and then what we had, that's doing ourselves and our lives a disservice. And the way I approach it, I guess what's helpful for me is I approach it in terms of part of what we do when we have a child or when we have a spouse or partner is we pledge to them, this is the way it's going to be. And as long as we're together, we're going to do that. But even if we're not, in my case, of course, I was married with a child. I've said this a bunch to you. I want to parent Roxy in her death as I did in her life, which is unbridled love, unbridled commitment. Just because she doesn't physically exist in this universe doesn't mean that she is not guiding my decision making. And I don't look at it as an obligation. I look at it as devotion. And the same thing with Elena. And for your viewers, my wife Elena died 9 months ago from what I commonly now say is depression-fueled cancer, because she was very, very depressed after Roxy died and never really recovered emotionally. So what is helpful is to remember that you can find purpose in absence, in absentia. And I think that purpose, clearly you found that purpose through No More Under, through all the incredible work that you've done, through your devotion, your love for Yori and your family, and your community and children in general. And I think that's what bonds us together. What I also find helpful is, and this is maybe expediting our conversation a little bit, but you have two options. There's, as you know, I'm making this small documentary, and in this documentary, one of the lines is, there's never a bridge I cross where I don't think how much easier it would be if I didn't make it to the other side. And that's true. That's absolutely true. And what I mean by that is very simple. I have a choice of whether or not I want to end my life or begin it in a new way. So what's helpful is knowing that I have that choice. Roxy didn't have that choice.
Mm-hmm.
So I have that choice. And if I didn't have a choice, well, then hell, maybe we wouldn't be talking right now. But because I have that choice and I've been gifted that choice still makes me want to get to the other side of that bridge and to do something about this rather than sit on my ass and not do anything for the two people that I love the most in this world. And what I'm doing for them is exactly what they deserve, which is trying to prevent other families from suffering, much like, of course, you are doing.
Yeah. I often say that, Doug. I feel like people always say time heals. And that hasn't, I mean, obviously, I'm coming up on 5 years next year. So maybe enough time hasn't passed for some reason, or I don't know. But for me, I do believe that it's the love, right? It's the love that for me, I still feel from and for Yori. Even the love that I feel that I get from the community, and just wanting to spread that. So I definitely feel like that love piece is huge. And I don't know, it's so easy. I don't want to say to look over that because it feels simple, like, doesn't it? But I do feel like when you're able, because your heart is so closed, when you lose like that, like, I mean, I wish that I could put into words what this feels like, because you can't. It's indescribable, right? The pain.
But you can. And I would say that's another thing that I've heard you put it into words, and you are beautiful with your words. And I believe that's something that we should get away from as a population very, very strongly. I think when we say we don't have the words for this or that, we're not trying hard enough. And I'm not accusing you. I'm guilty of it. Believe me.
Yeah.
Billions of times. You and I always have super candid conversations. So I think, if there's something that I've learned actually very early on in this conversation about preventable childhood death, preventable death in general, is that we need to find our words. We need to be much more thoughtful about our words, and words do matter. And then the other part of what you were saying is this other line that I've been writing and rewriting is, if our lives are not love stories, then what are we? What are we? If we are not love stories, then what are we? Are we hate stories? Unfortunately, we're seeing far too much of that. And hate is just a fear to me of love. That is kind of where I'm landing on hate. And I don't, like I'm sure you don't have much room for it, much patience for it. But I try to avoid that as much as possible and land on the love part of it, because if I'm not doing that, then I'm not doing my job.
Yeah. Going back though to what you said about not having the words, I've found that a lot of people are hesitant to say anything, after someone loses a child. I mean, it feels weird to give advice to those people, but like, what would you say? Like, is it better to say anything and mess up in what you're saying and maybe offend versus saying something to be supportive and be there?
I've read a lot about that too, and it's always a really good question, about what do you say in that moment, and it really depends on who you are and what you represent to the person who is aggrieved. Let's say it's you, and I'm a stranger, but I happen to know X about you, and we're getting to be familiar with one another in some way. That's a different situation than somebody who knows you better, or a family member or a coworker or somebody who's working in the aquatic safety business, I believe. I think that what I would suggest is that it can be super simple. I just want to let you know that I'm concerned about you and that I'm here for you. And if you want to chat, here's my number if you don't already have it. But just understand that it's that simple. And you can move on from there. It doesn't have to be some diatribe. If I do find that a lot of people that I know pretty well struggle with it. And that becomes a little less tolerable, because what happens is I think those folks are they're prioritizing their own discomfort instead of understanding your discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is less acceptable. I'll back up a little bit, and this might not go over well with people, but I'm really not in the habit of caring so much about that anymore. I feel that adults make it really, really hard on each other. And when they don't have to, we complicate things in such a way that children drown, or that we can't solve problems to prevent children from drowning. And one of those things is that we're not talking about, let's say, this particular issue, drowning, in very fundamental, basic terms. It is unacceptable, no matter what, whether I drop my child off at a camp and don't ask enough questions of that camp, or you do X, or Susie does Y, or Johnny does Z. We don't hold ourselves accountable enough. You and I have had this conversation 1,000,001 times. And even though I've evolved in this conversation, I do believe that we need to own things, and not to the point where it destroys ourselves. And why I'm saying this is I think a lot of times people on the other side of this conversation who are struggling for those words
Yeah.
are thinking those things. I've had this conversation with people, meaning like, why didn't Doug ask the question? Or why didn't Shazak do this? Or why do you know? Why? Because we're juggling 9 million balls in the air at the same time, not because we don't love our children, for God's sakes, because we're human beings. And whether they want to think it's a mistake or an oversight or whatever, that's on them.
Yeah.
But what we can do is we can certainly find a middle ground and say, I'm here for you. What can I do for you?
Mm-hmm.
And then, we can, as you and I have, I think, evolved through our conversations on this topic, I think beautifully, harmoniously. I love that about our relationship, because we come from two different circumstances, but the same result. And our conversations have just, I think, been enlightening and productive. And here we are.
Yeah.
I couldn't love you anymore. Well, maybe tomorrow I'll love you a little bit more, but really, because I respect you, and I respect that you want to have these conversations too.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say I have a couple things a couple different directions, as I always do. Usually I'm like, wait, don't. But yes, to your point, I just think that I don't want to say saying anything is helpful, but I think saying anything is somewhat helpful, even if it's the wrong thing. Because I'm good now at correcting people, or at least I either let it go when people say, oh, I'm drowning in all this work, which, you know what? I don't want you to walk on pins and needles when you're around me. Like, it stings a little bit for 10 seconds. If somebody is constantly saying it, I'll be like, you say this a lot. Maybe you can watch it. But, I think for me, and maybe this is bad to say, but when people say sorry for your loss, like, I know I'm sorry too. Like, I don't know what that means. I think it's better to offer I'm here if you ever want to talk, or let me know if there's anything I can do, even though oftentimes we don't even know, especially in those early days, you don't know. The other thing I'll say, and then
Let's dive in on that one.
oh,
Can we
okay.
stop there and then get to your second one?
Okay.
Did you write down?
I'm writing down. Yes, I'm writing
Okay.
down.
So I don't accept the word loss. I didn't lose anything. If I lost something, there's a possibility of me finding it.
Yeah.
So that is a word that I think we need to abandon. And what people tend to do is assuage their fears and abandon their responsibility to words like that, which is we use loss, we soften the edges of this by using words loss, because it's not as severe.
Mhm.
I always use this example now. If I'm telling a child what happened to my daughter Roxy, and I do have to occasionally tell a child, as you do in your work, what I've learned, and I am 100% committed to this, is to say what happened, to use the word Roxy drowned. She did die. And I'm not going to go much deeper on that, because a child, and especially depending on what the age is, if you tell a child that you lost your child, then they're going to say, well, can't you find them?
That's
Can't
right.
you find her?
Yeah.
And we're, it's the same thing with adults. We give ourselves too much leeway. So use those words. Roxy died. She died by drowning. And if they want to ask more questions, if this was a child, then you go down that path reasonably, not graphically, but reasonably, and especially depending on if that guardian wants you to further discuss it. Roxy and I, when she was alive, we had some very challenging discussions, but she was inquisitive, and she was, I think, and I believe Elena felt the same way, better for it, because we didn't avoid, it wasn't avoidance behavior. So I just wanted to say that, and just make sure that parents also understand that saying loss and other similar words is really not doing a child much good at all. In fact, it's harming their ability to comprehend what the situation is like. And I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to.
No. I think that's huge. And I understand your thought process on it. And I think that it makes more sense hearing after you talk about that, losing and finding things like, no, this is not something that is in the lost and found. So I think, I of course have a branch even from what you just said, that is, we have just an avoidance. I think, people are afraid of death. I think, something that Elena said was, I remember her just saying people judging, it like, do you feel judged? Are people judging you? Kind of dealing with that a little bit. And then in addition to all of that, it is, gosh, I lost what I was going to say. I just think that, people being able to stand tall, being there for you in a way that they can, that feels a bit comfortable. And it's uncomfortable. So I don't know what comfort, how comfort, but I say that often. I'm just like, I'm sending you comfort and
Right.
all of that. But the other thing that I was going to say, and this is kind of to wrap things up, but to me, looking at you here now, the most kind of comforting thing, and it's not to push anyone else out, but I find comfort in speaking to other people that have had this experience. And maybe this is for the parent or, family member of someone who has drowned, watching this. But that has been for me one of the most comforting. I don't know if it's comforting, but it's someone that really understands. As you said, we had two totally different circumstances, but the way that we can relate on this, it's really helped me process so much over the course of, since I've known you since just a few months after Roxy passed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because you called me bravely and said, hey, this is who I am. This is my story. And I won't forget that phone call, as I've mentioned to you many times. And I found that there were two things going on. A, you were searching for a connection, and which is extraordinarily courageous and of you. And B, you wanted to help. And that also says a hell of a lot about you. In these situations where children die from preventable circumstances, man, you and I both know the guilt we feel, the weight on our shoulders, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. Unless you're a murderer and you're holding your child's head underwater, a different story. But yeah, I think the bond that we have goes to this idea that once you witness what young death looks like, you don't come back from that. You're going to exist now in a very different way for the rest of your life. And without, again, kind of beating around the edges here, the bushes, it's what you have to look at. You look at your most, and I know in your instance, you have three other beautiful children. But if any one of them suffered this circumstance, or if I had three more children, if any one of them suffered that circumstance that we had to actually see the consequences of, it would be the same. When you see a human being, let alone a child, take their final breaths in front of you, and they are your child, there is no coming back. You're not going to exist beyond it. You're not going to get over it. You're going to live inside it and beside it and with it for the rest of your days. It's how you choose to connect with that. And I agree. I think that's where you and I connect, because there's this, which we haven't really talked a lot about, but there's people often go to the PTSD, word. I don't know if it's post-traumatic stress, but it's trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's trauma. And when you're holding the hand of your child, and I know your circumstances were different too, because I know that you did your damnedest to revive him. We made that decision within 24 hours. We knew that there was no coming back, and there was no, as I've said to you, there's no Roxy left in Roxy at that point. So it was a pretty immediate decision. But I don't know if you and I, which is a weird thought, will ever not have these conversations. What will these conversations be like in 5 years or 10 years? I think they've already evolved in the 3-ish years that we've had these conversations, right? So I can only imagine that they'll continue to evolve, and we'll look back hopefully at this, and we'll be even better equipped to handle our lives. But I would ask you the question, you know, do you feel that emptiness, especially as a mom, for goodness sake, will ever leave you? I would imagine I know the answer to that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No, I do. I think that talk about the lost and found thing. Like, I feel like I keep searching for something to fill, because you do just feel that hole there. It's again, I say it takes your breath away sometimes, but I feel it. And I keep thinking, okay, if I work harder, if I do more, and it doesn't necessarily, maybe it's temporary, that I feel like, okay, I did something, like I did something. And I think that was one of the last conversations that we had, actually, is, again, when will it ever be enough? Because part of what I struggle with is that we look at this every day. Like I say, how many times do you say drowning in a day? And is that torturous? I'm not sure, but I just think that, again, we are two people of many that this has happened to, and everyone has a path. Um, but yeah, it's just, I feel like it's helpful to hear, us talking, and hopefully, just provide some, I don't know even what I want it to provide, but just something for someone.
I know what you want to provide. You're providing it. You're providing, going back to the word love, you're using your love for your son, and for your family, and for your community, and for yourself, by the way, to do something about this rather than just to.
Let it happen to me a little bit.
Right. And exactly. And as you were talking before, what I tend to think about now is we're trying our damnedest to save our kids. We can't. We can't bring Yuri back, and we can't bring Roxy back. But I do feel that there is something that is irreversible in us trying to reach into those swimming pools and pull them out.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I was thinking, as I frequently do, about what I've said recently a whole bunch, and it's disturbing even for me to hear myself talking about it. But I was thinking about how Roxy, and this may or may not be something you want to show, but was in 4 feet of water, and the last vision she has is looking up, to these brightly colored bathing suits of boys and girls, maybe thinking before everything in her brain and her body is dying, why aren't you reaching in to pull me out, mommy, daddy? Where are they? Where's my daddy right now? He would never let me do this. He would never let me drown. And that is the visualization that darts
Yep.
across my brain, behind my eyes all the time. Why aren't you reaching in and grabbing me right now?
Yep. Yeah.
That's it, right? I mean, and that's why we get up in this panic every day. And you and I don't necessarily talk about it in those terms, but I do believe that this is our coping mechanism. Is this is the way we're going to cope for however long, whether it's another year or 3 years or whatever. And then we're going to have to find the next thing to be able to cope with it because the trauma is too great.
Yeah. I I don't ever know because obviously I can talk to you for hours. But I think I just want to at least wrap up by thanking you for just being there for me, and just always being an ear and always you make me think in a way, that is different often than what I'm thinking, but gets me to a place of a new understanding often, and or I did that a lot, just thinking about Yori and some of his last thoughts. Like there's some things that you just replay. But again, I want to thank you for being supportive of me, myself, and I, No More Under. And thank you again. I don't feel like I ever officially properly introduced you, but Doug Forbes of Meow Meow Foundation, and it's meowmeowfoundation.org. Is that right?
Right.
Great. And so I'm also excited. Hopefully we can come back and talk about filming, and, have that conversation maybe at some point when you're done. I'm excited to actually see you this coming weekend.
I'm not going to let you go without saying one thing, which is A, I love you. B, well, these are going to be 2 or 3 things. A, I love you. B, I admire the hell out of you, and you are such a catalyst for the things that I do. Always know that you are an inspiration, and you're a catalyst that even beyond the drowning prevention work that you're doing, you're just a good human. And it takes a special soul to do this work the way that you're doing it. And whether, again, you do it for another season or another 5 seasons, it doesn't matter. We can't quantify things in that way. But I think it's really important for people to understand that we have each other, but that we also want to make sure that people, like you were mentioning Elena before, people aren't afraid to have these discussions with us too. I think that's very, very, very important to just say, I've been thinking about this, Shazak or Doug, can we chat about it? And the more that I do that, even though it's painful, I think the better the outcome is for me, because it's almost like therapeutic, right? Without paying the $350 an hour to do for the therapy. So I will leave it with that and how incredible No More Under is. And I hope this film, you got to make sure that the film doesn't stop, please. It is super important. And I promise the next destination, I will be your companion, wherever that may be. But I love you.
Really.
Yeah, yeah, right.